You think Black mothers freely shared their best Christmas recipes? Think again. These holiday treasures were guarded fiercer than gold, passed down only when deemed worthy. These weren't just recipes. They were inheritance, tradition, and power wrapped in brown sugar and spice. Here are 30 secret Christmas recipes Black mothers refused to share until now. 7-layer caramel cake was the crown jewel that appeared only at Christmas, taking 2 full days to complete. Black mothers baked 7 thin yellow layers that had to be perfectly even, then made caramel frosting from scratch by cooking sugar until amber, adding cream at precisely the right moment. The frosting required constant stirring and a candy thermometer, with temperatures mattering more than oven settings. Each layer was brushed with vanilla syrup, then stacked with warm caramel between, assembled while the frosting was still workable. The finished cake stood 8 inches tall with a glossy shell that cracked beautifully when sliced. Grandmothers made this cake, aunties made this cake, but the recipe stayed locked in memory, never written down. It was shared only with daughters who'd proven themselves patient enough to stand at the stove for hours. The cake represented legacy, the kind of food that announced a woman's mastery and her commitment to making Christmas extraordinary. Secret Spice Eggnog was the Christmas drink that guests begged to replicate but never could. Black mothers made it from scratch with raw eggs, whole milk, heavy cream, and sugar, but the magic lived in the spice blend. Nutmeg was obvious, cinnamon expected, but the secret additions, cardamom, mace, allspice, sometimes clove, created complexity. Store-bought versions couldn't touch. The mixture was cooked gently until it thickened into custard, then chilled overnight. Some families added dark rum or bourbon, others kept it virgin but added vanilla bean and almond extract for richness. The eggnog was served in crystal punch bowls at Christmas Eve gatherings, thick enough to coat a spoon. Children got small cups, adults got generous pours, and everyone tried to guess the secret ingredients. Mothers would smile when guests guessed cinnamon, but the real combinations stayed hidden, passed down only through whispered kitchen conversations when daughters were trusted with family secrets. Brown sugar bourbon ham glaze transformed the Christmas ham from ordinary to legendary, creating a mahogany crust that crackled when carved. Black mothers started with dark brown sugar, maple syrup, and Dijon mustard, but the secret was good bourbon, smooth stuff that added depth without harshness. The glaze was simmered with butter, apple cider vinegar, and blackstrap molasses that gave it caramel complexity. Some families added crushed pineapple, others used orange zest, but every family had their specific ratio. The ham was scored in diamonds, studded with cloves, then basted every 20 minutes, each application building layers of flavor. The glaze pooled at the bottom, mixing with drippings to create sauce so good people sopped it with rolls. This recipe was guarded because it made every other ham taste ordinary. Daughters-in-law asked for it, neighbors hinted, but the measurements stayed in mother's head until she decided you'd earned the right to carry it forward. Great-grandmother's coconut cake was a 3-layer monument to coconut in every form. Black mothers baked white cake layers flavored with coconut milk, giving them moisture that lasted through New Year's. The frosting was genuine boiled icing, sugar, corn syrup, and egg whites beaten while hot syrup drizzled in, creating something between frosting and marshmallow. The secret was the coconut preparation. Fresh coconut was grated, then toasted until golden and fragrant, mixed with sweetened flaked coconut for texture. Between each layer went coconut cream filling, thick and custardy. The assembled cake was covered in boiled frosting, then pressed with handfuls of toasted coconut until no white showed. It was refrigerated overnight so flavors could meld, resulting in cake so moist it melted on your tongue. This recipe stayed secret because it required genuine skill and patience. Store-bought frosting wouldn't work, and rushing the boiled icing meant failure. Praline sweet potato casserole elevated humble yams into something so decadent that guests forgot it was technically a side dish. Black mothers roasted sweet potatoes whole until their sugars caramelized, never boiling them because that made them watery. The roasted flesh was mashed with butter, brown sugar, eggs, vanilla, and the secret ingredient, bourbon that enhanced without announcing itself. The mixture went into a buttered dish, but the glory lived in the topping. Pecans chopped fine and coarse, combined with brown sugar, flour, melted butter, and cayenne that made the sweetness interesting. Some families added crushed cornflakes for crunch. The casserole baked until the topping bubbled and crisped, creating a shell that had to be cracked with a serving spoon. This wasn't the marshmallow-topped version white families made. This was sophisticated and complex. Mothers guarded the bourbon and cayenne secret because those touches separated their casserole from everyone else's. Rum raisin bread pudding used up leftover bread while tasting more luxurious than fresh-baked cake. Black mothers soaked raisins in dark rum for 3 days before Christmas, letting them plump and absorb alcohol. Stale bread, white bread, Hawaiian rolls, leftover cornbread was cubed and dried overnight. The custard combined eggs, heavy cream, whole milk, vanilla, cinnamon, and nutmeg, with extra yolks for richness. The secret was condensed milk, which added sweetness and created texture that wasn't quite custard, wasn't quite cake. The bread soaked in custard for an hour, absorbing every drop, then was folded with rum-soaked raisins and dotted with butter. It baked low and slow until the top crisped while the inside stayed creamy. The finishing touch was rum butter sauce. Butter, brown sugar, cream, and more rum, poured over warm servings. This appeared only at Christmas because the rum expense and 3-day preparation meant it was saved for the year's most important meal. Brandied cranberry orange relish was the condiment that made store-bought cranberry sauce look like a joke. Black mothers made this weeks in advance with fresh cranberries that popped and burst as they cooked with sugar, orange juice, and zest. The secret was cooking them just until they broke down but still had texture, never letting them turn to mush. Once cooled, the relish was spiked with good brandy, enough to taste clearly but not be boozy, plus crystallized ginger chopped fine for heat. Some families added chopped pecans, others used golden raisins plumped in the brandy first. The relish was stored in glass jars where the alcohol preserved it and flavors melded into something more complex. By Christmas, it had transformed, sweet, tangy, warm, with brandy depth that paired perfectly with turkey and ham. Mothers guarded the brandy ratio and crystallized ginger addition because these made their relish memorable. Guests asked for the recipe every year, and every year mothers said it was just cranberries. Triple chocolate chess pie combined Southern tradition with chocolate decadence, creating a dessert so rich that small slices satisfied. Black mothers started with homemade pie crust made with lard, blind baked until golden. The filling was classic chess pie, eggs, sugar, butter, vinegar, and cornmeal, but transformed with 3 chocolates: cocoa powder whisked into sugar, melted bittersweet chocolate folded into eggs, and chocolate chips scattered across the crust. The secret was using buttermilk instead of regular milk, which reacted with chocolate to create brownie-like fudginess while maintaining chess pie's crisp top. Vanilla and espresso powder deepened the chocolate. The pie baked until the center barely wobbled, then cooled where it set into something between custard and fudge. The top crackled when pressed, giving way to dense chocolate richness. This appeared only at Christmas because chocolate was expensive. Mothers kept the triple chocolate technique and buttermilk secret. Honey-glazed cornbread dressing was the side dish guests returned for thirds of, completely different from dry sage-heavy stuffing. Black mothers made their own cornbread in cast iron until dark and crusty, then crumbled it and left it out overnight. The cornbread was mixed with sautéed celery, onions, and the secret trinity, bell peppers that added sweetness and color. The liquid wasn't just broth, but turkey drippings, chicken stock, and the secret addition: honey stirred into melted butter. Eggs bound it together, sage and thyme added savory depth, but the honey created complexity. Some families added chopped pecans, others stirred in crumbled sausage, but the honey butter mixture was universal. The dressing was spread in deep pans, dotted with butter, and baked until the top crisped while the inside stayed moist. The honey caramelized slightly, creating sweet spots that contrasted with savory richness. Mothers guarded the honey technique because it separated good from unforgettable dressing. Buttermilk sky biscuits were Christmas morning tradition. tall and fluffy and buttery enough to make store-bought rolls irrelevant. Black mothers made these before sunrise using self-rising flour, buttermilk, and cold butter cut into pea-sized pieces, never melted, because that destroyed flakiness. The secret was handling the dough minimally, folding it exactly 3 times to create layers without developing gluten. Some grandmothers used white lily flour specifically, swearing nothing else produced the same tenderness. The shaped biscuits were placed touching in cast-iron skillets, so sides stayed soft while tops and bottoms crisped. Before baking, each was brushed with melted butter mixed with honey, not enough to make them sweet, just enough to create a golden glaze. They baked until risen to twice their height, then were brushed with more honey butter while hot. The recipe stayed secret because perfect biscuits required technique more than ingredients. Cinnamon-spiked red velvet cake was Christmas tradition that separated real bakers from box mix pretenders. Black mothers made this from scratch using cocoa powder, buttermilk, and red food coloring. But the secret was ground cinnamon stirred into the batter, just enough to add warmth without announcing itself. The cake was light and tender, with subtle chocolate flavor that let the cream cheese frosting shine. That frosting was made with real cream cheese, butter, and powdered sugar, beaten until fluffy. Some families added pecans, others kept it smooth, but everyone agreed that cream cheese frosting from a can was an insult. The 3-layer cake was assembled with generous frosting between each layer, then covered completely until no red showed. It was refrigerated overnight so the flavors could marry and the cake could firm up. The cinnamon addition stayed secret because it was subtle but essential, creating complexity that made people wonder what made this red velvet different from all others. Ambrosia salad with fresh coconut was the Christmas side dish that straddled dessert and salad. Black mothers made this using fresh fruit, mandarin oranges, pineapple chunks, maraschino cherries, and the secret addition of pomegranate seeds that added jewel-tone color and tart brightness. The binding agent wasn't just whipped cream, but a mixture of whipped cream, sour cream, and cream cheese that gave it tanginess. Fresh coconut was grated and toasted lightly, adding nutty depth that sweetened flaked coconut couldn't match. Mini marshmallows were folded in at the last minute so they stayed soft. The salad was refrigerated for several hours, letting flavors meld while the coconut softened. It was served in crystal bowls at Christmas dinner, looking almost too pretty to eat with pink and white and red colors. The pomegranate addition and the cream cheese mixture stayed secret because these elevated ambrosia from church potluck standard to something genuinely special. Molasses ginger snap cookies were the Christmas cookies that actually snapped when broken, spicy and crisp and perfect for dunking in coffee. Black mothers made these weeks before Christmas, storing them in tins where they stayed fresh through New Year's. The dough started with molasses, dark, not light, which gave the cookies deep flavor and dark color. Fresh ginger was grated into the dough along with ground ginger, creating layers of heat. The secret was black pepper and cayenne, just pinches that added complexity without obvious spiciness. The dough was chilled overnight, then rolled into balls, rolled in coarse sugar, and baked until the edges set. As they cooled, the centers firmed into the perfect snap. These weren't soft, chewy cookies, but proper ginger snaps that crackled. They were packed into tins with parchment between layers, given as gifts to neighbors and teachers. The pepper and cayenne addition stayed secret because most people couldn't identify what made these snaps more interesting. Collard greens with smoked turkey and hot pepper vinegar were Christmas dinner tradition that proved vegetables could be the star of the plate. Black mothers started preparation Christmas Eve, washing greens leaf by leaf to remove every speck of grit. The greens were cooked low and slow with smoked turkey necks or wings, onions, garlic, and the secret addition, a ham hock for extra richness. The pot simmered for hours until the greens turned dark and tender, the broth becoming Potlikker so flavorful it could be sipped alone. The finishing touch was hot pepper vinegar, white vinegar infused with hot peppers for weeks, splashed over the greens just before serving. The vinegar brightened the rich greens and added heat that cut through their earthiness. These greens appeared on Christmas tables alongside ham and turkey, often eaten with cornbread to soak up the Potlikker. The ham hock addition and the hot pepper vinegar technique stayed secret because these created depth and complexity that plain greens couldn't match. Pecan pie with bourbon and dark chocolate was the Christmas dessert that made store-bought pecan pies taste like cardboard. Black mothers made this with homemade crust, using butter and lard for tenderness and flake. The filling started with dark corn syrup, brown sugar, eggs, and melted butter, but the secrets were bourbon stirred in for depth and dark chocolate chips scattered across the bottom. The bourbon enhanced the pecan's natural flavor without making the pie taste boozy. The chocolate melted during baking, creating pockets of rich darkness. Whole pecan halves were arranged on top in perfect circles, making the pie beautiful. It baked until the center was just set but still had slight wobble, then cooled to room temperature where it firmed perfectly. The combination of bourbon and chocolate elevated pecan pie from ordinary to extraordinary. Mothers guarded these additions because they represented sophistication and the knowledge that traditional recipes could be improved with careful enhancements. Candied yams with pineapple and pecans were the Christmas side dish that children actually asked for seconds of. Black mothers baked yams until tender, then peeled and sliced them thick, arranging them in buttered baking dishes. The syrup wasn't just butter and sugar, but included crushed pineapple with its juice, brown sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg, and the secret addition of orange juice and zest that brightened the sweetness. Pecan halves were pressed into the top, creating a gorgeous presentation. The dish baked until the syrup thickened and caramelized, the pecans toasted, and the yams absorbed all those flavors. Some families added marshmallows for the last few minutes, but traditionalists kept it pure. The pineapple added moisture, while the orange juice kept them from being cloying. This dish appeared on every Christmas table, its sweet richness balancing savory meats. The orange juice addition stayed secret because it was the key to perfectly balanced sweetness. Oyster dressing was the Christmas tradition for families who lived near water, combining cornbread dressing with briny oysters. Black mothers made cornbread specifically for this, letting it stale overnight before crumbling. The oysters were fresh, shucked that morning, their liquor saved for adding to the dressing. The cornbread was mixed with sautéed celery, onions, bell peppers, and herbs, then moistened with chicken broth and the oyster liquor. The whole oysters were folded in gently so they stayed intact during baking. The secret was adding hot sauce and Worcestershire sauce that enhanced the oysters' brininess without overwhelming them. The dressing baked until golden on top but stayed moist inside, the oysters plump and tender. This dish divided families. Some loved the combination, others couldn't get past the texture. But for oyster dressing families, Christmas wasn't complete without it. The hot sauce and Worcestershire addition stayed secret because balance was everything with oysters. Fruitcake soaked in rum was the Christmas tradition that separated good fruitcake from the jokes everyone made about bad fruitcake. Black mothers started this cake in November, giving it time to age properly. The cake was dense with candied fruit, cherries, pineapple, citrus peel, and chopped pecans, bound together with spiced batter. The secret was soaking the fruit in rum for a week before baking, letting it plump and absorb alcohol. After baking, the cake was wrapped in rum-soaked cheesecloth, then wrapped again in foil and stored in a tin. Every week until Christmas, the cloth was unwrapped and more rum was brushed over the cake, building flavor and moisture. By Christmas, the cake was dark, dense, and intensely flavored, nothing like the dry, tasteless versions people complained about. It was sliced thin and served with coffee, a little piece going a long way. The weekly rum basting stayed secret because it required patience and attention that most people wouldn't commit to. Buttermilk cornbread with honey butter was Christmas dinner's supporting player that often stole the show. Black mothers made this in cast iron skillets heated with bacon grease until smoking hot, creating a crust that shattered when you bit it. The cornbread was made with white cornmeal, buttermilk, eggs, and just enough flour to give it structure. The secret was adding creamed corn to the batter, which kept the cornbread moist for days. It baked until deep golden brown, almost burned at the edges, the center tender but not gummy. The honey butter was softened, butter whipped with honey until fluffy, but the ratio mattered. The cornbread was served hot, split open, and smeared with honey butter that melted into every crumb. This cornbread appeared at Christmas dinner to soak up Potlikker from greens, gravy from dressing, and juices from ham. The creamed corn edition stayed secret because it was simple but effective. Lemon chess pie with whipped cream was the Christmas dessert that balanced all the heavy, rich foods with bright acidity. Black mothers made this with homemade crust, blind-baked to prevent sogginess. The filling combined eggs, sugar, butter, cornmeal, and fresh lemon juice and zest, lots of both for intense citrus flavor. The secret was adding a tablespoon of white vinegar along with the lemon juice, which created tang that made your mouth water. The pie baked until the center was just set, the top golden and slightly crackled. It cooled to room temperature where it firmed into creamy, custardy filling that sliced clean. The whipped cream wasn't sweetened but left plain, so its richness balanced the pie's intense tartness. Some families added a splash of vanilla to the cream, but most kept it pure. This pie appeared at Christmas because lemons were expensive and using so many was a luxury. The vinegar edition stayed secret because most people assumed all the tang came from lemons alone. Black walnut pound cake was the Christmas treat that required foraging wild nuts in fall. Black mothers cracked black walnuts by hand, extracting the dark, intensely flavored meats that made English walnuts taste bland. The pound cake was traditional: butter, sugar, eggs, flour, but the black walnuts transformed it into something earthy and complex. The nuts were toasted lightly, then folded into the batter just before baking. The secret was using both butter and shortening in equal parts, which created pound cake that was tender but still had proper heft. A splash of bourbon enhanced the walnut's natural flavor. The cake baked in a tube pan until golden brown, filling the house with aroma that was impossible to resist. It cooled completely before being wrapped and stored, improving over several days as flavors deepened. Black walnuts stayed secret because finding and processing them required knowledge that not everyone had. Hoppin John with collards was New Year's Eve tradition that started at Christmas dinner as a promise of good fortune. Black mothers cooked black-eyed peas with rice, smoked ham hocks, onions, and the secret addition of tomato paste that added depth without announcing itself. The peas simmered until tender, then rice was stirred in to absorb the flavorful broth. Collard greens were served alongside, their Potlikker mixing with the Hoppin John on the plate. The combination represented prosperity: peas for coins, greens for paper money. Some families added hot sauce, others preferred vinegar, but the tomato paste stayed universal. The dish was eaten at midnight on New Year's Eve, ensuring the coming year would bring financial blessing. Mothers made extra because leftovers were considered lucky to eat throughout January. The tomato paste edition stayed secret because it created umami that most people couldn't identify but definitely tasted. Peppermint bark with dark chocolate was the Christmas candy that Black mothers made for gift-giving. Dark chocolate was melted carefully, tempered properly so it set with proper snap. The secret was adding a pinch of sea salt to the chocolate before spreading it thin on parchment. Once the dark chocolate set, white chocolate was melted and spread over top, then immediately sprinkled with crushed peppermint candy. The bark was chilled until firm, then broken into irregular pieces that looked rustic and beautiful. The salt in the dark chocolate balanced the sweetness and made the peppermint taste brighter. This candy was packed into tins lined with wax paper, given to neighbors, teachers, and co-workers. Making it required patience. Chocolate had to be the right temperature. Peppermint had to be crushed fine enough. Timing had to be perfect. The salt addition stayed secret because it was subtle but essential to preventing the bark from being cloying. Hot wassail with spices was the Christmas drink that kept a pot simmering on the stove throughout the holidays. Black mothers made this with apple cider, orange juice, lemon juice, and the secret spice blend: whole cloves, cinnamon sticks, allspice berries, and star anise tied in cheesecloth. The mixture simmered for hours, filling the house with smell that announced Christmas more than any decoration could. The secret addition was cranberry juice and a splash of rum or brandy that added complexity without making it boozy. The wassail was served in mugs to guests who dropped by, to children coming in from playing in snow, to adults gathered around the tree. Each mug was garnished with an orange slice studded with cloves. The spice blend and cranberry addition stayed secret because these created depth that plain apple cider couldn't match. Mothers kept the pot going from Christmas Eve through New Year's Day. Scripture cake was the Christmas tradition that taught Bible verses through baking. Black mothers made this using ingredients referenced in the Bible: butter, Judges 5:25, sugar, Jeremiah 6:20, flour, 1 Kings 4:22, eggs, Isaiah 10:14, figs, 1 Samuel 30:12, almonds, Genesis 43:11, raisins, 1 Samuel 30:12, honey, Exodus 16:31, spices, 1 Kings 10:10, and salt, Leviticus 2:13. Children would look up verses while their mothers measured ingredients, learning scripture while preparing Christmas dessert. The secret was the spice combination: cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves, and cardamom in specific proportions that varied by family. The cake was dense, dark, and rich with dried fruit and nuts. It baked slowly, then was wrapped and aged like fruitcake. Scripture cake represented faith, family, and the connection between food and worship. The spice proportions stayed secret because these defined each family's version. Green tomato mincemeat was the Christmas preserve that used end-of-season tomatoes before frost killed them. Black mothers chopped green tomatoes, apples, raisins, and sweat, then cooked everything with sugar, spices, vinegar, and the secret addition of molasses that added depth. The mixture simmered for hours until thick and dark, developing complex flavors that improved with age. The secret spice blend included cinnamon, cloves, allspice, nutmeg, and a pinch of black pepper. The mincemeat was canned in jars and stored until Christmas, when it was used for pies, tarts, and cookies. The green tomatoes provided pectin that helped the mincemeat set while adding tang that balanced the sweetness. This preserve represented resourcefulness, using what the garden gave before winter came. The molasses and black pepper additions stayed secret because they created complexity that most people assumed came from expensive brandy. Sweet potato biscuits with cane syrup were Christmas breakfast tradition that turned leftover sweet potatoes into something special. Black mothers mashed roasted sweet potatoes, then mixed them into biscuit dough with buttermilk, butter, and just enough flour to make the dough workable. The secret was adding a tablespoon of honey to the dough, which enhanced the sweet potatoes' natural sweetness. The biscuits were tender and slightly sweet, their orange color making them festive. They were served hot with butter and cane syrup drizzled over top, the syrup's molasses notes complementing the sweet potatoes perfectly. These biscuits appeared on Christmas morning alongside eggs, sausage, and grits, their sweetness balancing savory breakfast foods. Children especially loved them because they tasted almost like dessert. The honey addition stayed secret because it was the difference between good sweet potato biscuits and extraordinary ones. Beef Wellington, adapted for Black families, was Christmas dinner centerpiece that proved fancy food could be made at home. Black mothers used the best beef tenderloin they could afford, searing it until crusty, then wrapping it in mushroom duxelles, pâté, and puff pastry. The secret was seasoning the mushrooms with Worcestershire sauce and hot sauce, which added umami and subtle heat that elevated the dish. The wrapped beef was brushed with egg wash and baked until the pastry was golden and the beef reached perfect medium rare. The secret additions stayed hidden because they represented adaptation, taking French cooking and making it speak to Black palates. This dish appeared at Christmas when families wanted to show sophistication. The preparation required skill and confidence that many women had, but rarely displayed. The Worcestershire and hot sauce additions stayed secret because they made the Wellington uniquely theirs. Lady Baltimore cake was the white cake that appeared at the fanciest Christmas celebrations. Black mothers baked 3 white cake layers flavored with almond extract, then made boiled frosting beaten to stiff peaks. The secret was the filling: chopped pecans, raisins, and figs folded into frosting with brandy and orange zest. The filling was spread thick between layers, while plain frosting covered the outside. The cake was ethereally light, its white exterior hiding the rich, fruity filling inside. It was served on crystal cake stands at Christmas tea parties and after church gatherings. The cake represented elegance and the aspiration to refinement that many Black families valued. Making it required skill. The cake layers had to be tender without being fragile. The frosting had to be beaten to exact consistency. The brandy and orange zest additions stayed secret because these made the filling complex rather than just sweet. Peanut brittle with cayenne was the Christmas candy that had unexpected heat. Black mothers made this by cooking sugar and corn syrup to hard crack stage, then stirring in roasted peanuts, butter, vanilla, and the secret addition, cayenne pepper that added warmth without obvious spiciness. Baking soda was stirred in at the last second, making the candy puff slightly and creating proper texture. The mixture was poured onto buttered sheet pans, spread thin, and left to cool completely. Once hard, it was broken into irregular shards that snapped cleanly. The cayenne made people's mouths warm as they ate, the heat building slowly and making them reach for more. This brittle was packed into tins and given as gifts, its unexpected kick making it memorable. The cayenne addition stayed secret because most people couldn't identify what made this brittle different, only that it was more interesting than any they'd tasted before. Churned milk soup was what you made when you had finished making butter and still needed a meal. That leftover buttermilk became the base for a tangy, hearty soup that could feed a family from a single pot. It was mixed with cornmeal, herbs, and whatever vegetables were on hand, then simmered until it thickened like velvet. The smell was sharp but cozy, filling the kitchen with warmth and familiarity. Some families dropped bits of bread into the bowl, letting it soak up the flavor. It was simple food, born from old farm routines and frugal wisdom. Churned milk soup taught that nothing should ever be wasted, not even the scraps of a good day's work. It soothed hunger and reminded everyone that comfort could come from the most ordinary things. With each spoonful, it carried the echo of laughter and work from generations before. Sugar cane sticks were the simplest kind of sweetness, and they carried a special memory for children who grew up with little. Fresh cane was cut into sticks, peeled, and chewed for its sweet juice, offering a natural candy when refined sugar or store-bought treats were out of reach. For many children in the South, walking home with a stick of sugar cane was as good as holding a chocolate bar. It was affordable, long-lasting, and carried the earthy, raw sweetness of the land itself. Parents loved it because it kept children happy without costing much, and it taught the value of finding joy in small things. Sugar cane sticks carried the reminder that sweetness did not need to come from a store, but from fields worked by hand. They were part of the rhythm of rural life, tied to harvests and family memories. Even in the toughest years, sugar cane sticks brought happiness. Persimmon seed coffee emerged when imported beans were rare or too costly for enslaved communities. Wild persimmons dropped their fruit in autumn, and the hard seeds inside were washed, dried, and roasted until dark and fragrant. Ground and steeped in hot water, they produced a warm, nutty beverage with no caffeine but plenty of comfort on cold mornings. This practice carried forward after the Civil War, especially during wartime shortages when coffee imports faltered again. Families across the South roasted persimmon seeds alongside chicory or other local substitutes, proving the durability of this inventive method. The gentle flavor and toasty aroma made it a beloved alternative long after necessity faded. Today, a few heritage festivals still brew persimmon seed coffee to honor the ingenuity of those who first discovered its rich taste. The drink reminds us that creativity in the face of scarcity can yield traditions that outlast the circumstances that gave birth to them, turning survival into a legacy of flavor and resilience. Wild muscadine grape jam brought the late summer woods to the breakfast table in a deep purple shine. Children and parents walked along fence lines and wooded edges with baskets in hand, searching for the thick-skinned grapes that thrived in southern heat. Once gathered, the fruit was boiled gently until the skins burst and the pulp softened, filling kitchens with a fragrance that hinted at honey and earth. The juice was strained and mixed with sugar, then cooked again until it thickened into a jam rich enough to spread over biscuits or stir into morning porridge. Families prized each jar, knowing that muscadines grew wild and free, needing only careful hands and patience to become something sweet. In some towns, church groups organized picking days, turning the harvest into a social event where songs and laughter echoed through the vines. Today, supermarket grapes have replaced the wild hunt, and store-bought jams lack the musky depth of fruit ripened under southern sun, but memories of purple-stained fingers still linger in many hearts. Fish head stew was a dish born out of necessity, yet it carried surprising depth and flavor. Fish heads, often discarded by others, were simmered slowly with onions, potatoes, and rice until they yielded every ounce of richness to the broth. My grandmother insisted the heads made the stew better than fillets, providing body and nourishment that nothing else could. The bones and skin flavored the liquid until it turned hearty and comforting. Potatoes stretched the meal, rice thickened it, and vegetables added substance, turning scraps into a filling supper. The taste was strong, earthy, and unforgettable, reminding everyone that no part of food should go unused. For Black families in the 1960s, fish head stew was a common way to stretch the catch of the day, ensuring nothing went to waste. It became a lesson in thrift and gratitude, proof that survival demanded creativity. Fish head stew was both humble and mighty, sustaining families through lean times with flavor and tradition. Persimmon leather was a sweetness born from scarcity, made when sugar was a dream too far from reach. Wild persimmons, soft and golden when ripe, were gathered by hand and mashed into pulp, their tartness fading into deep honeyed flavor as they dried under the southern sun. Spread thin on boards or cloth, the pulp hardened into chewy sheets that could last for months, folded and stored for the hard winter ahead. It was candy made by patience, nutrition pressed into a form that would not spoil. The process itself was quiet work, often done at the edges of daylight, each batch a small defiance against hunger. When the cold arrived and food was scarce, a strip of persimmon leather could lift spirits and soothe hunger's edge. In its sweetness lived a lesson. Survival does not always mean bitterness. Sometimes it tastes like sunlight caught in fruit. Grease gravy rice was what people cooked when they refused to let anything go to waste. When breakfast meats were done frying, the leftover grease became treasure. A spoon of flour went in first, sizzling and popping until it turned golden. Then milk or water got poured in, slow and steady, until it thickened into smooth gravy. That hot gravy poured over white rice made something out of nearly nothing. It was salty, creamy, and smoky all at once. The smell filled the house and the taste filled the stomach. Parents called it breakfast, but it could carry a family through an entire day. It came from kitchens that knew survival like a second language, where flavor was earned from thrift and patience. Kids grew up thinking it was comfort food, not knowing it was born from rationing and struggle. Grease gravy rice was more than a recipe. It was a declaration that no meal was too small to matter. Every bite was a promise that the family would eat, even when times were lean. It was humble food that carried pride on a spoon. Peanut soup had deep roots in West African cooking and carried over into the kitchens of Black America during times of scarcity. Families would boil peanuts until soft, grind them into a paste, and whisk them into broth with onions and seasonings. The result was a creamy, nutty soup that filled stomachs without relying on expensive meat. Because peanuts were widely available and inexpensive, this dish became a dependable source of protein and comfort. It could be served plain with bread or thickened with vegetables to stretch even further. Children grew up tasting peanut soup as a warm, sustaining dish that soothed hunger while carrying the echo of older traditions. The flavor was earthy and satisfying, reminding families of both resilience and cultural roots. Peanut soup showed that the most affordable ingredients could still produce something memorable, sustaining entire households during difficult seasons. It was not just soup, it was survival food with heritage poured into every bowl. Goosefoot seed meal offered vital nourishment when cultivated grains were scarce or too costly. Goosefoot, also known as lamb's quarters, grew abundantly along field edges and yielded tiny seeds rich in protein and minerals. Enslaved harvesters shook the plants over cloths to collect the seeds, then winnowed and ground them into a fine flour. This flour could be cooked into hot cereal, mixed with cornmeal for bread, or used to thicken stews, providing a surprisingly hearty alternative to purchased grain. The practice drew on both African and indigenous traditions of using wild seeds as staple foods. Even after emancipation, rural families in parts of the Midwest and Appalachia continued to gather goosefoot seeds for their high nutritional value. Modern interest in quinoa, which is a close relative, echoes this old wisdom. Goosefoot seed meal stands as a reminder that careful attention to the landscape and patient handwork could turn what many considered weeds into a dependable source of strength and nourishment that kept families fed through the hardest seasons. Black walnut pound cake carried the wild woods straight into the holiday kitchen with a perfume unlike any other. Foragers collected the hard-shelled nuts each autumn, cracking them carefully to release the dark, robust kernels inside. The cake batter, rich with butter and eggs, absorbed the strong, earthy flavor of the walnuts, baking into a loaf dense enough to slice thin and savor slowly. Served at Christmas or family reunions, the cake announced both celebration and the success of gathering nature's bounty. Children helped shell the nuts, their hands stained brown from the husks, a seasonal badge of honor. Neighbors traded slices wrapped in wax paper as gifts, spreading cheer through the community. Today, imported walnuts and commercial cakes have replaced the ritual, but the memory of that deep, almost smoky taste lingers for those who once enjoyed a slice with coffee while snow fell outside and the house smelled of spice and toasting nuts. Giblet gravy over rice was one of those dinners that showed how nothing went to waste in the kitchen. Chicken was expensive, but the innards, the gizzard, liver, and heart, were cheap or sometimes even given away by butchers. My grandmother chopped them small, simmered them in broth, and thickened the pot into a rich gravy that smelled like Sunday supper. Poured over rice, it became hearty enough to stretch across the whole family. The rice soaked up the flavor, turning a small handful of giblets into a meal that fed 6 mouths without complaint. Some children turned up their noses at first, but hunger taught quick appreciation, and the taste of the gravy was strong, savory, and full of life. She said, "Giblet gravy was proof that dignity came not from the cut of meat, but from the hands that prepared it." In the 1960s, this dish carried people through lean nights, filling bowls with warmth when little else could be afforded. Giblet gravy over rice was frugality turned into something satisfying. Brine-preserved greens were an ingenious way to hold on to summer's bounty long after the fields went bare. Collards, mustard greens, and turnip tops were packed into wooden barrels filled with salt water, weighed down with stones, and sealed tight. Over weeks, the leaves softened and fermented slightly, taking on a tangy flavor that woke up the dullest winter meal. They could be rinsed and cooked with lard, onions, or whatever scraps were available. This simple method kept vitamins alive in seasons when fresh food was impossible to find. The scent that rose when the barrels were opened was sharp, earthy, and comforting, a taste of summer revived in the dead of winter. In homes that had little, these barrels represented life insurance against hunger. Preparing them required patience and precision, the kind of quiet discipline that survival demanded. The barrels lined cabin corners like silent guards against hunger, waiting patiently until their contents were needed. In every household that relied on them, brined greens became a sign of foresight and care, another way the enslaved turned hardship into nourishment, proof that even time itself could be bent toward survival when guided by wisdom and will. Sweet potato biscuits were the soft-spoken stars of every humble table. Made from mashed sweet potatoes, flour, and a touch of lard, they carried the sweetness of the earth and the strength of those who planted it. Each biscuit came out of the oven golden, warm, and smelling like home. Sweet potatoes were a gift crop, tough enough to thrive when others failed, and they carried families through hard seasons. These biscuits stretched what little was available into something that felt like luxury. They were eaten for breakfast with syrup or alongside greens and stew at supper. No matter when, they always brought a comfort that money could not buy. The dough was often mixed by hand, shaped on worn counters and baked in cast iron. The rhythm of making them passed from mother to daughter like a blessing. Sweet potato biscuits were proof that sweetness could come from struggle, that even the humblest harvest could rise high in the oven and on the heart. They fed not just the body but the spirit, turning hardship into hope with every tender bite. Which secret recipe would you beg your grandmother to share? Drop the name in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe so we can keep revealing the hidden traditions that made Black Christmas tables legendary.